So I'm going to be talking about innovation and innovation of the mind. Now, to make it a little bit more personal, I want to ask a question to the audience. Anybody in here remember their first memory? Anybody? Got an idea? Now, if you would ask me that question, my first memory, okay. My first memory, I'm in Miami, Florida. I'm 4 years old. It's at night. It's warm. I'm sitting on my grandfather's knee. My brother's here today. My mom's here. I love you, Mom. And they're playing. I'm the youngest. I'm 4. So they're playing in the front yard. My grandfather is watching everything. He's looking over everybody. I'm sitting on his knee. And I'm looking at the stars. I'm not concentrating on the kids that are playing, my relatives. I'm looking at the stars, and I'm captivated. You know how when you're young, everything is new. And I'm looking at the stars, and I'm just fixated on this image. And my grandfather, just to give you an idea about my grandfather, was a powerful, strong man. He was darker than 1,000 midnights. He was dark. I'm talking about you going back to the root with my grandfather. My grandfather had a cigarette in his mouth, and I'm looking at the stars, and my grandfather looked down at me, and he used to call me Little Willie. He said, Little Willie, I got a lot of grandkids. You know that? And I looked up at him, and I said, yeah. And he said, I want you to know, out of all those grandkids, you're the dumbest one. Now, my school was next door to my grandfather's house. He stayed in a small efficiency house. And the school was called Floral Heights. It was in Overtown, Miami. And we would walk, my brother and I, we would walk across the street and go to school. And my grandfather was a working man. He worked for himself. And he would go to work, and we were latchkey kids, which are a lot of latchkey kids. Parents work, come home from school. He would not be home, and we had to just make do. He provided for us. And I remember my teacher in the second grade, and she was a beautiful black woman. What was the first grade? I'm sorry. She was a beautiful black woman. She had very long nails, and she loved her nails. I know, because she used to do her nails in class sometimes. And before the end of my first grade year, my mom moved us to Ohio. And she moved us to Warren, and she put us in public schools, First Street Elementary School. It doesn't even exist anymore. They tore it down. And they put me in the second grade, and it didn't take long for them to find out that I couldn't read. I didn't know my colors. I didn't know how to spell, and I didn't know how to write my name. Not just that, I spoke with a lisp, so I had a speech impediment. So what they did in Warren City Schools, they put me back, first of all. They put me back in the first grade, thank God. And they gave me a special ed teacher. Her name was Mrs. Lusick. I'll just give you an idea about Mrs. Lusick. She was a small, petite, old white woman. And she didn't play. And if you got out of line, she would take her fingers and stick it in your cheeks and squeeze them, and she would push you up against the wall. This is when teachers could touch kids. And she would push you up against the wall, and she would be in your face, and she would let you have it. And you knew not to get smart or say anything, because we were raised that way. My mom raised us and taught us to have respect for adults. And Miss Lusick took the time. She taught me how to read. She taught me my colors. She taught me how to write. And she corrected my speech impediment. Probably one of the most unlikely people. See, but what it took, we're talking about innovation of the mind. What it took was she took time and she cared. And she changed the direction of my life. So much so that I'm able to stand in front of you today and articulate how I feel. Now, I can mention a lot of people who intervened in my life. It wasn't just Miss Lusick, but Miss Lusick stands out. Now, of course, my mom was very helpful. I got to say that. Yeah, I got to say that, because I got to be around her when this is over with. And my mom is the type of person, she'll say, listen, you was talking about that teacher, but who was feeding you? Who fed you? And I'd be like, listen, I only had a few minutes to talk. She'd be like, I don't care. You had enough time to say who fed you. So it's official. My mom fed us. Very well, okay? So, and I understood why my mom moved us to Ohio. And she don't know, but I was about 18 years old, and I was looking through some of her personal papers. She had a box, and I was looking for my birth certificate and my Social Security card. And I was going through her box, and I remember finding this picture. And I'm looking at this picture, and I'm being honest. I thought she had adopted one of those kids in a third world country. And she didn't tell us. So I'm looking at this picture, and I'm turning it, and I'm spinning it. And I'm looking in the eyes, and it's me. It's me when I was in the first grade. So I understood the teacher I was telling you about. When I would come into her classroom, she would look at me with disgust. She would be disgusted in me and my appearance. I almost didn't recognize myself. My grandfather was a good man. I learned a lot from my grandfather. My grandfather dropped out of school in the third grade to support his family. My grandfather was a veteran of World War II. My grandfather was one of the few African-American men who actually saw action in World War II. He wasn't relegated to a cook or just a handyman during the war. He actually fought in the tradition of the Buffalo Soldiers. My grandfather was very strong. He taught me a lot of good things, a lot of things about life. And he wasn't an affectionate man. He wasn't a hands-on kind of guy. He wasn't the kind of guy, if you fell down, he'll kiss your boo-boo. He didn't do that. He figured what his job was to feed you and discipline you. And I got a lot of that. And I remember finding that picture, and I tore that picture up in like 100 pieces, in my mind at least. I didn't want anyone to ever see this picture. And I guess probably about a few weeks later, I was with my mom, and we were in the kitchen. She was cooking, and I was doing dishes, and I brought it up. I brought the situation of my grandfather up, and we never talked about it. And I said, listen, I don't think he liked me. And she said, well, he was rough on everybody. I said, hold on now, this is different. This wasn't no just rough on everybody. He had some surplus for me. I mean, I don't understand where this was coming from. She said, well, what you don't know is that when I was pregnant with you, and this is another thing, my dad is a veteran of Vietnam, and he was very abusive to my mom. She was pregnant with me, and my father was beating my mom in the front yard, and my grandfather, to help his daughter, jumped off the porch with a stick, and my father put out a gun and pointed at him. Now, I talked to my father a few years later after that, and he confirmed everything my mom said. He said, yeah, he pulled a gun out, and he had a stick in his hand. I thought it was a gun. My military training, I pulled my gun out, and I was going to shoot him, and I was going to kill him. He said, but the friend of the family was in the car, came with my dad, luckily. He told my dad he was wrong, talked him down, and told him they had to go. My grandfather carried that. And so when I talk about innovation of the mind, it's about not living in the past. Of course, we recognize the past, we forgive it, we move on. But there's something called a positive past, and that's what innovation of the mind is. Innovation of the mind is being able to recognize the past, but also being able to recognize the good things that have happened in your life. Not just that, but making a difference in other people's lives, reaching people. Now I do leadership development, all because of Mrs. Lucic, all because I know how to articulate. English became my favorite subject. And I was on a path, like a lot of young people, and that's why I'm so passionate about leadership development. I know it works. I know if it's applied properly with some care and some love, that it makes differences in people's lives. I want to thank everyone for listening to my talk and my presentation. I'll see everybody after the show, actually.